Who remains unbroken when even the stars themselves are ground to ash? So begins the whisper carved upon an obsidian tablet entombed beneath the ruins of old Macragge, a question older than any victory hymn, spoken in the hush before annihilation. Its surface still glows faintly, as though written by a hand drenched in celestial fire. From that question rises the first breath of a legend. Captain Titus, son of Guilliman's proud line, a warrior carved from duty and silent defiance. The galaxy around him roils with the screams of dying worlds, but he stands unmoved, shaped by the weight of 10,000 forgotten wars. In him, faith and fury entwine like twin chains, anchoring him against madness as the shadow of chaos spreads its endless night. Within the shifting tides of the eternal war, the question persists, whispered by prophets, murmured by the dying, who remains unbroken? And the chronicle silently answers Titus. The war-scarred vaults beneath the fortress of Terra remember his earliest steps better than any living scholar. Their metallic bones still resonate with the thrum of his armor, the echo of his oath-sealed march toward destiny. Even then, before renown, before infamy, before suspicion had ever brushed his shadow, Titus bore the posture of one chosen by war. Veterans saw in him a storm caged in ceramite, disciplined, sharpened, but dangerous if the bars ever cracked. As the galaxy screamed and tore itself apart, he learned to read the hidden language of conflict, the tremor of warp disturbance in the air, the smell of lies in diplomatic chambers, the shifting hue of fear across a soldier's eyes. In every battlefield he walked, the dead seemed to rise in memory, guiding him like mournful saints. From such grim tutelage, a captain was born, forged not from triumph but necessity. When the orcs descended upon Graia, their green tide swallowing continents like a living curse, the Imperium declared the world lost long before the first fortress fell. Yet Titus came not to mourn but to defy. Graia's skies burned with toxic flame, its manufactorings coughing black smoke into a wounded firmament. And amid that ruin strode Titus, bolter roaring like the judgment of forgotten gods. Orcs hurled themselves against him in waves, their crude blades shrieking across his armor as though trying to carve their names upon an immortal wall. With each slain Xenos, Titus felt something ancient stir within him, not bloodlust, but a clarity sharper than any blade. A cold realization that his destiny was not merely to fight, but to endure when endurance should have been impossible. Even the Adeptus Mechanicus witnesses whispered later that they had seen a man wreathed in impossible resilience, a living contradiction the galaxy was not prepared to name. But victory always demands its price, and Graia's triumph birthed suspicion rather than celebration. When the taint of demon sorcery brushed the battlefield, Imperial command turned not to honor Titus, but to question him. How had he resisted corruption where others fell screaming? How had he stood unshaken when the warp itself reached for his soul? The Inquisition's gaze fell upon him like a blade pressed to the throat. Bound in interrogation cells colder than void ice, Titus met accusation not with fury, but with calm certainty, an unspoken truth burning behind his eyes. He swore he had felt no whisper of chaos, no seduction of the dark. And yet, in the dim reflection of his cell's metal walls, he sometimes saw a flicker of something vast, as though the warp itself regarded him not with hunger, but with recognition. A secret neither ally nor enemy dared name. Exiled from glory, Titus returned to Macragge not as a hero, but as a question. His brothers greeted him with restrained respect, masking unease behind ritual formality. Some called him cursed, others chosen. None spoke it aloud, but all felt the unease coil like a serpent around their hearts. Yet Titus carried himself with the same steeled bearing, the same unwavering loyalty to duty, as though suspicion were merely another wound to be endured. He trained harder than before, letting the clang of sword against adamantium drown the murmurs that haunted the fortress halls. And as the galaxy darkened beneath the great rift's birth, even his accusers found themselves turning toward him, compelled by the inexplicable certainty he exuded. It was as if the storms of reality bent themselves around Titus, leaving him a fulcrum of impossible balance in a realm spiraling toward madness. When the Indomitus Crusade swept forth under Guilliman's return, Titus answered without hesitation, stepping once more into the throat of cosmic war. Entire star systems screamed as the warp clawed reality apart, twisting void roots into spirals of terror. Yet wherever Titus landed, the horror seemed to recoil, not through awe, but through something colder. On the damned world of Narcissus, demons surged from fracture rifts like molten nightmares, but faltered as Titus advanced, their forms flickering as though caught between dimensions. His strike squad watched in silent disbelief as the creatures hesitated, as if recognizing something forbidden within the captain's presence. Titus pressed forward with grim purpose, his sword cleaving immaterial flesh as though sculpting silence from storm. The demons hissed not in rage, but in fear. And though he spoke no word of it, Titus felt their gaze, familiar, knowing, and deeply alarmed. Whispers followed him across the crusade. Psychers flinched at his proximity, claiming they sensed a void where a soul should be, or something veiled behind a curtain of absolute will. Before long, the whispers twisted themselves into prophecy. Fragmented divination spoke of the Unbroken, a warrior untouched by the wounds that unravel empires, a figure whose fate shimmered beyond mortal comprehension. Titus ignored them all, but destiny is a predator that does not respect denial. On the shattered moon of Vatharis, surrounded by demon engines prowling through a graveyard of relics, Titus faced a creature whispered to be older than the heresy itself. It halted mid-charge, its warp flesh quivering. Then it spoke a single rasped phrase not heard since the age of Primarchs. "We remember you." A shiver traced even Titus's battle-hardened spine, for he felt the truth in the creature's terror. The war for Vatharis dragged into a nightmare siege. The ground beneath Titus's boots churned with corrupted organs, each heartbeat echoing through the very bedrock. Yet in the heart of that hellscape, he held the line where any mortal would have broken. Brothers fell beside him, their purity torn apart by warp-spawned filth, but Titus remained an immovable anchor of blue and gold fury. Even when a tide of demon-possessed engines swarmed his position, he did not yield. Instead, a strange stillness washed over him, as though time itself paused to acknowledge his defiance. Bolter's shells moved like falling stars. His blade became a streak of azure light, and every demon slain dissolved into ash that seemed almost reverent. His squad later swore that in that impossible moment, Titus moved with a purpose not entirely his own, guided by an unseen hand woven of war and inevitability. Word of his feat spread, reaching the ears of Primarch's commanders who cared little for old suspicions. Titus's legend surged anew, whispered in litany chambers and battlefield vox feeds alike. Many believed he bore a shard of Guilliman's ancient resolve, a genetic spark amplified in the fires of unending strife. Others whispered darker theories, that the warp feared Titus not for his purity, but for a destiny entwined with something far older than the Imperium itself. As his renown grew, so too did the unease among psychers and oracles. Visions of a starless horizon, of a warrior walking unscathed across the corpse of the galaxy, haunted their dreams. Yet Titus pressed forward, neither seeking truth nor fleeing it, his devotion anchored in the Ultramarine creed, duty before dread, sacrifice before doubt. On the desolate frontier of the Ghoul stars, where even light struggled to maintain its form, Titus confronted a force unlike anything recorded. The enemy was not demon nor Xenos, but something nameless, a silence that devoured sound, a shadow that swallowed prophecy. Entire battalions vanished into its void hunger, their armor left behind like hollow exoskeletons devoid of memory. Titus stepped into that impossible quiet and felt the universe tilt. The silence pressed against him like a suffocating hand, probing, judging, searching for a fracture in his spirit. But the fracture never came. Instead, something within the void retreated in sudden, inexplicable dread. Titus emerged alone, armor scarred with sigils no scholar could decipher, whispers of the abyss curling from his pauldrons like dying smoke. The galaxy shuddered as if recognizing an overture in the making, an omen written in silence. When he returned to Macragge, the fortress itself seemed to dim beneath his presence, as though ancient stones recognized a tide long foretold. Guilliman himself greeted Titus with a measured gaze, finding no corruption, no taint, yet sensing the weight of unsung truths coiled behind the captain's steady eyes. For the first time, Titus felt uncertainty gnaw at him, a faint tremor beneath his armor. His primarch spoke of duty, vigilance, and destiny, but within those words, Titus heard something left unspoken, something feared, something inevitable. As he knelt before Guilliman, the chamber's lumen strips flickered, shadows bending toward Titus like supplicants. The primarch hesitated before delivering final orders, a rare telling pause. And though no one else saw it, Titus noticed the faintest glimmer of recognition in Guilliman's expression, as if the primarch glimpsed a memory that should not exist. And now, as this chronicle resurrects itself across forgotten archives, the legend of Captain Titus stands at a precipice carved by fate. He prepares for another campaign, one unrecorded in Imperial annals, yet whispered in the trembling breaths of oracles. His armor gleams beneath braziers of blue flame, his gaze fixed on horizons no mortal can see. Around him, reality trembles faintly, a ripple too soft for most to notice, but unmistakable to those attuned to the fabric of destiny. Some say it is merely the warp reacting to his indomitable will. Others believe it is the universe recognizing a long-forgotten oath. Yet as Titus steps toward the waiting void, the ancient question returns once more, colder and more precise than ever. Who remains unbroken? And somewhere in the dark between stars, a voice answers, quiet, familiar, wrong. Not you, not yet. But soon. From the final breath of the first chronicle, the darkness deepens, not as an ending, but as a quiet inhalation from something ancient, turning its unseen gaze upon the living. The stars hang like dying embers across the firmament, trembling in the cold hush that follows prophecy. And in that silence, the galaxy exhales old wounds. Across the fortress monasteries of the Imperium, incense coils in narrow chambers where priests whisper benedictions through cracked lips, each prayer a trembling attempt to stitch meaning into a cosmos unraveling thread by thread. They speak of Captain Titus not as a hero, nor as a curse, but as a question walking in the shape of a man. Some kneel in awe. Others flinch when his name is spoken. For in him, they sense a truth that does not bend to scripture, and nothing terrifies the faithful more than revelation stripped of permission. Brother serfs move through candlelit corridors, bearing relics older than dynasties, and though they dare not admit it, they feel the tremor beneath their feet each time Titus passes. It is not the tremor of war gear nor armored stride, but the echo of destiny grinding against fate. Librarians meditate within their sanctums, eyes rolled white as they extend their thoughts toward the warp. But every time their consciousness brushes the outline of Titus's soul, something snarls back, not in hostility, but in rejection, as though his spirit exists in a place the Imperium cannot fully reach. One librarian collapses from the strain, blood streaming from his eyes, whispering, "He is unseen." Unseen even by the abyss. His words are sealed, dismissed as psychic trauma, but within the reclusium, priests etch wards upon wards, afraid that the captain's path may yet fracture their fragile doctrines. Marines on distant fronts speak his name with guarded reverence. Veterans murmur that Titus bears himself as though carrying a memory too heavy to share, while the young whisper of miracles witnessed and terrors that fled before him. Yet as admiration grows, so too does doubt. Chaplains preach that faith must not become reliant on the deeds of one man, no matter how unbroken, while the shadows behind their eyes betray something deeper, a fear that Titus's unwavering composure mocks their own trembling devotion. For what does it mean when one warrior stands serene against horrors that drive chaplains to redoubled sermons and psychers to silent screams? What does it imply about the Imperium's endless war, if one man seems untouched by its deepest wounds. Within the council chambers of Macragge, politics congeal like coagulated blood. Commanders debate Titus's reassignment with voices honed to diplomatic precision, though little disguises the tension sliding beneath formal phrases. Some push for him to be elevated, to join the Primaris elite as a symbol of Ultramarine supremacy. Others argue he must be contained, tethered, watched. Too many coincidences orbit him like mournful satellites. Battles that should have ended in massacre turn into improbable victories. Demon incursions falter at his approach. Prophecies twist to acknowledge him, like reeds bowing beneath a rising tide. The council's debate becomes a battlefield of its own. Duty against fear, reverence against suspicion, and no amount of ritual civility can mask the truth. Even among the Imperium's greatest, loyalty fractures where uncertainty feeds. In the Scali Reclusa, young acolytes pore over forbidden archives, seeking answers their instructors refuse to provide. They find fragments whispered in hidden margins, mentions of the unbroken, of a warrior whose destiny was foretold in the shadow of the heresy. They discover ghost recordings of ancient seers who spoke of a soul that would stand outside the reach of corruption, not because of purity, but because of an anomaly in the design of man itself. Such texts should have been purged centuries ago, yet they persist like stubborn scars upon the parchment of history. As the acolytes read, fear settles upon them, heavy and suffocating. Their instructors catch wind of their inquiries and erase the archives entirely, but the knowledge does not die. It festers quietly in the minds of the young, planting seeds of heresy beneath the veneer of obedience. Meanwhile, on the fringes of Ultramar, parish worlds reel beneath the weight of failing faith. Pilgrims wander broken holy roads, clutching relics to their chests as they beg for deliverance. The whispers reach even them, rumors of Titus, the captain who stands where reality bends. Some call him a sign of salvation, a beacon sent by Guilliman to stabilize an age of ruin. Others claim he is a warning, a deviation in the divine design, a warrior whose unyielding nature is an affront to the very imperfections that give humanity purpose. Conflicting sermons ignite in cathedral plazas, priests clashing not with blades, but with doctrines sharpened into weapons. Faith becomes a battlefield, and each faction clings to Titus as either saint or omen. Beneath stained glass arches, the schism widens. The Adeptus Mechanicus adds its own voice to the turmoil. Tech priests study the battlefield logs of Titus with mechanical fascination. His armor records fluctuations that defy scientific pattern, void resonance at impossible frequencies, psychic interference without a psyker present, and energy signatures reminiscent of lost technologies predating the Imperium. To question such anomalies is heresy, yet to ignore them is dereliction. The Mechanicus finds itself on a knife's edge, forced to choose whether Titus represents a relic of forgotten mastery, or a threat that must be dissected. In cold forged temples, cogitators hum as forbidden calculations unfold in secret. The results are sealed away, encrypted beneath 10 layers of machine psalms, but even sealed data emits an ominous aura. Something does not fit. Something cannot be quantified. From the perspective of the rank and file, war continues without pause, and Titus remains their anchor. On the charred plains of Calph's outer moons, squads fight under his command and feel their courage surge as though the air grows lighter in his presence. Yet within their hearts, doubt worms its way through the cracks. Why does the warp recoil from him? Why do omens twist in his path? Why do enemy psychers scream upon seeing his silhouette, as though beholding a memory not meant for mortal eyes? A sergeant confesses his fears to a chaplain, who listens in patient silence. But when the sergeant departs, the chaplain remains alone, his Crozius trembling faintly in his grip. Doubt is a contagion, and even he is infected. The Inquisition watches all of this unfold with glacial precision. Agents embedded among the Ultramarines report every gesture, every victory, every moment of stillness from Titus. Their dossiers grow thick, bound with sigils that stain the parchment with subtle heat. A conclave meets in hidden depths beneath a dying star, and the debate that ensues is quieter than the councils of Macragge, but far more lethal. Some argue Titus is a stabilizing force in an unstable age. Others see him as a variable that could unravel carefully maintained control. One inquisitor speaks only once. If destiny shields him from the warp, then destiny itself is suspect. It is a sentence that chills even the most hardened agents, for if destiny is compromised, what hope remains? Even Guilliman feels the tension growing. In his private sanctum, the Primarch studies projections of future warfronts, tracing faint threads of possibility only a demigod's mind can perceive. Titus appears in outcomes where victory seems impossible, standing as a lone pillar against nightmare tides. He also appears in darker scenarios, one so troubling that Guilliman orders them deleted, though the images burn themselves into his memory. He wonders if the Emperor foresaw a warrior like Titus, or if the galaxy has birthed something outside divine order. The thought gnaws at him, subtle yet insistent, like a splinter beneath armor. And then, in the silence between campaigns, certainty shatters. During the midnight rite of remembrance, as the Ultramarines gather in solemn ranks beneath the massive effigy of Guilliman, a tremor ripples through the fortress. Braziers flicker out, vox lines die. Shadows lengthen unnaturally, curling like talons around marble pillars. In that suffocating stillness, every warrior feels a presence unfurl, vast, ancient, aware. Titus reaches for his weapon by instinct, but before steel meets air, the shadows around him twist, not toward the warriors, not toward the chaplains, but toward him as though greeting an old companion. Gasps echo. A psyker collapses, shrieking a single forbidden word, recognized. And in that impossible moment, the effigy of Guilliman cracks down the center, splitting as though recoiling from the truth manifesting in its midst. The shadows withdraw. Titus stands unmoved, and every soul in the chamber understands, not with clarity, but with dread, that a revelation long buried has begun to surface, one that the Imperium was never meant to witness. From the broken silence left in the wake of Part 2, the shadows recoil only to seep deeper into the marrow of the galaxy. The fracture in Guilliman's effigy becomes more than a symbol. It becomes a wound in collective certainty, a quiet tear in the veil through which doubt bleeds freely. Across cathedral worlds, priests cling to their rosaries with white knuckles while staring at statues that suddenly seem too still, too watchful. In their private prayers, a trembling honesty emerges. They fear the Emperor is not silent, but listening, weighing their faith like brittle parchment. And in the stillness between heartbeat and breath, they feel something vast approach. Not benevolence, not damnation, but recognition. The galaxy itself seems to inhale, as though bracing for a truth long denied. Beneath dying stars, believers confess not their sins, but their uncertainty. And in those whispered admissions, the cosmos takes another ominous step toward unveiling what should never be known. Memories haunt the Ultramarines like ghosts with unfinished tasks. Veterans recall the moment the shadows reached for Titus, not with hostility, but with familiarity, and their recollections warp into quiet torment. They replay the event each night while cleaning their bolters, searching for an angle, a detail, anything that frees their Primarus brother from unspoken heresy. But memory is cruel. It sharpens what they wish would dull. They see the way the darkness bent, the way the psyker screamed, the way the air itself recoiled. And they feel shame for doubting him, shame for believing him, shame for being caught between devotion and dread. Even the most stoic warriors know the truth. Faith is easier when the world behaves as expected. But nothing behaves anymore. Not the warp, not prophecy, not Titus. And in their hearts, a slow confession forms. They are afraid of what loyalty may cost them next. Chaplains retreat deeper into their sanctums, their sermons strained, their litanies edged with desperation. They preach the Emperor's name until their voices crack, trying to drown out the lingering echo of the psyker's final word, recognized. That single utterance lingers like a blasphemous hymn, eating its way through doctrine. If the shadows recognize Titus, why? They scour old scriptures for answers, prayers carved into bone, hymns etched onto iron plates, forbidden apocrypha wrapped in barbed chains. Yet every text circles back to the same void. There is no precedent for a man the warp does not seek to corrupt, but to acknowledge. Chaplains whisper confessions into the dark, confessing doubts they dare not reveal to their brothers. And sometimes, in the dim glow of votive candles, the shadows on the walls twitch as if listening. The Inquisition, ever watchful, fractures along ideological fault lines. Some see Titus as a weapon forged for an age of catastrophe, a bulwark against forces that rend galaxies. Others see him as a breach, a tear in the Emperor's design, a deviation that cannot be tolerated. A clandestine conclave meets aboard a drifting cathedral ship lit by dying lumen strips. The Inquisitors speak in hushed venom-soft tones, their breath frosting in the cold void, leaking through fractured insulation. One reveals a forbidden relic, a data shard recovered from a hidden vault, sealed since the Grey Heresy. It contains a prediction attributed to a long-dead Psyker prophet. The words are few, rough, unfinished, yet devastating. When the Unbroken rises, the design will warp. The conclave freezes. No one speaks the thought. No one admits the fear. But every Inquisitor feels it. The Emperor's plan may not be immutable. In the Mechanicus, tech priests descend into furious religious mania. The data anomalies surrounding Titus multiply, fluctuations in reality's baseline, fluctuations in his presence, fluctuations in the fundamental constants that govern real space. Amagos wipes away machine oil tears as he witnesses a cogitator predict the impossible, a convergence point in which Titus becomes a vector, a variable, a divergence in the Emperor's divine algorithm. He orders the machine spirit purged. Others disagree. Internal divisions sharpen like scalpels. Two tech priests, once all eyes, now face each other in a frozen manufacture mile, each arguing a different heresy. One believes Titus is a catalyst meant to strengthen the Imperium. The other insists he is an error that must be nullified. Their voices rise until binary chanting drowns them out. But even their machine hymns tremble with static, as though the Mechanicus's own god machine feels unease. Across the battle-scarred moons of Calth, soldiers feel reality warp around them like a dying dream. During a night watch, a squad of Ultramarines sees the stars flicker, not in cosmic rhythm, but like candles suffocated by a distant breath. A Vox operator kneels, helmet pressed against the frozen ground, whispering a memory he cannot unsee. When the shadows approached Titus, he felt something reach through him, something ancient, inquisitive, and faintly mournful. It had searched him, dismissed him, then passed on. He confesses this to his sergeant, choking on shame. The sergeant says nothing because he too felt it. And behind them, the darkness seems deeper, as though waiting for confession to ripen into vulnerability. The squad presses tighter together, not out of fear of the enemy, but fear of understanding. The Psykers of Ultramar grow increasingly unstable. They speak of nightmares where Titus stands not as a man, but as a scar, a rupture in the warp's memory. One Psyker seizes during a communion rite, screaming that Titus is a silent shape like a warrior. Another remains catatonic, eyes wide, whispering. He is familiar to the storm. As hysteria spreads, a senior librarian attempts a soul scan on the captain. He prepares rituals, wards, sanctified chains. Titus allows it in solemn stillness. The librarian begins the probe, and instantly recoils, blood spraying from his nose and eyes. His soul feels as though it collided with an ancient door that refused to open. The captain kneels beside him, calm, composed, unaware of what the Psyker glimpsed. A presence behind the door, older than demons, older than humanity, awake. In the outer worlds of Ultramar, civilian faith splinters into cults. Some worship Titus as a living omen, a herald born to reshape the galaxy. Others fear him as a sign of approaching doom. Pilgrims carve his likeness onto broken shrine pillars, while dissidents burn those carvings in secret gatherings. A child prophet on Darnax claims the Emperor dreams through Titus, using him as a vessel of half-spoken warnings. She is executed within hours, but her prophecy spreads long after her ashes scatter. "He is the hinge upon which the age will break," she whispered before death. Her words echo across Vox channels, digitally distorted, yet unmistakably chilling. Guilliman himself stands in the Hall of Remembrance, gazing at the cracked effigy that once mirrored his face. He places a gaunted hand upon the fracture and feels an unnatural cold seeping through the stone. He senses a truth no Primarch should ever feel: the Emperor's design shifting, adjusting, compensating for a variable introduced outside his will. A faint tremor runs through Guilliman's armor. Not fear, not doubt, recognition, as though his father whispers a warning too late to heed. Meanwhile, Titus walks alone through the fortress of Hera, contemplative beneath starfire bleeding through broken stained glass. He does not understand why the shadows reach for him. He does not understand the dread in the eyes of his brothers. All he knows is that something is awakening, within the galaxy, within the warp, and perhaps within himself. His memories blur at the edges, as though someone has begun rewriting them in the distant past. He hears whispers at the rim of perception, gentle and mournful. And then the revelation begins. In the deepest vaults beneath Macragge, alarms shriek. The stasis tombs holding Forbidden's relics shudder as though struck from within. A warded sarcophagus, unmarked, unknown, sealed since the Emperor's earliest campaigns, splits open. Light pours out, cold and silver. As guards rush in, the sarcophagus empties itself into the air like spilled creation. A fragment of something impossible drifts upward, a shard of pre-human origin inscribed with symbols older than chaos. It rotates once, and every sensor, every psychic ward, every machine spirit on Macragge screams the same alarming truth. The shard is keyed to Titus, not recognizing him, not responding to him. Keyed, as if he were its maker. The galaxy holds its breath, and Titus begins to remember. From the moment Titus begins to remember, the galaxy seems to recoil, not in terror, but in dreadful anticipation, as though reality itself senses the return of a long-interred truth. The shard hovers in the vault like a fragment of frozen lightning, its ancient symbols shifting in patterns no living mind can decipher. Tech priests fall to their knees, not in reverence, but in raw, animal fear. They sense the impossible connection between man and relic, between present and a history the Imperium has spent millennia trying to bury beneath layers of doctrine. Across Macragge, a storm of whispers spreads, that Titus remembers things no mortal should recall, that his mind echoes with memories that predate the Legionis Astartes themselves. Yet amid this burgeoning terror, Titus stands silent, jaw set, eyes hollow. To remember is not a blessing. To remember is to bleed. And he knows the wounds of forgotten ages bleed deepest. Ultramarines gather in uneasy formations, their brotherhood strained by questions they dare not voice. Some watch Titus with open awe, believing him chosen by a design too vast for mortal comprehension. Others avert their gaze, ashamed of the dread they feel creeping beneath their armor. They were trained to fear heresy, corruption, betrayal, but not this. Not a brother marked by miracles and impossibilities. A sergeant who once fought at Titus's side trembles as he recalls old battles, moments that seemed insignificant now recontextualized into omens. He remembers the way demons faltered, the way warp light dimmed, the way fate bent. He wonders, was Titus protecting them from the warp, or was the warp protecting itself from him? The question gnaws at him like a rusted blade. And in the hollow silence between their breaths, the fortress feels colder, as if acknowledging a truth they refuse to speak aloud. Chaplains descend deeper into devotion, drowning their doubts in ceaseless prayer. Their croziuses strike stone floors with fanatical rhythm, ringing like funeral bells for dying certainty. They preach the Emperor's truth with strained voices, layering faith upon fear, binding themselves with scripture like weak men binding shattered bones. And yet, when they kneel alone in the darkness, their litanies falter. A single poisonous thought slips through their defenses. What if devotion demands a cost the galaxy can no longer pay? They have sacrificed everything, flesh, future, identity, in service to the Imperium. But what if loyalty itself has become a chain forged from ignorance? Even the most stalwart chaplain feels a fracture form within his spirit. And in that crack, a truth begins to bloom, a truth ancient as the first betrayal. If Titus is a revelation, then their faith has always been incomplete. The Inquisition sharpens its blades and ideologies in silent corridors that reek of machine oil and incense. Inquisitors pore over the relic's data signatures, their faces pale behind the glow of hollow sigils. Some fear Titus represents a threat that could unravel the Imperium's sacred architecture. Others insist he is the Emperor's final gambit, a hidden piece of the master plan. None agree, all doubt. One Inquisitor, a woman hardened by a lifetime of interrogations, feels her certainty fracture as she studies the shard. Its symbols shift into patterns resembling thought, memory, intent, as though the relic thinks. She realizes with cold dread that the shard was not simply keyed to Titus. It recognized him as the source of its creation. Her faith wavers, her hand shakes, and in her trembling, she senses the first ripple of a decision that may damn or save the Imperium. The Mechanicus wages a silent war against itself. Factions form in the shadows, each claiming the relic offers proof of their conflicting doctrines. Some declare Titus the reincarnation of a lost techno-savant from humanity's golden age. Others insist he carries an imprint of pre-human intelligence, woven into his soul like Forbidden's code. Skittery patrol the forge halls with rifles primed, not against invaders, but against their own brethren. The Omnissiah's priests chant binary prayers while tears of coolant streak their metal cheeks. They feel the Imperium's technological foundations shifting, warping, reconsidering their place in a universe that suddenly seems wider and stranger than they ever imagined. And beneath their fear lies a deeper agony, the realization that the God Machine may have kept secrets even from those who serve it most devoutly. Civilians across Ultramar sense the change in the air like prey sensing a predator's breath. Shrines flicker with cold flame, relics pulse faintly, and children speak dreams that adults refuse to hear. A mother kneels at a cracked altar, praying for the Emperor's protection, yet feeling only silence echo back. She weeps, not because she feels abandoned, but because she senses something new watching, something patient, something familiar. On distant worlds, cults form and fracture within the same night. Some worship Titus as a savior. Others accuse him of being the herald of the galaxy's dissolution. Civil war stirs beneath the veneer of loyalty, the kind born not from rebellion, but from unequal interpretations of the same unbearable truth. Faith becomes a battlefield, and every believer becomes a soldier. The librarians gather in the Hall of Echoes, their minds trembling like shattered glass. Visions sweep through them in violent waves, glimpses of Titus surrounded by ancient beings made of starlight and sorrow, glimpses of him standing at the birth of galaxies, glimpses of him forging the shard with hands not yet created. One librarian, trembling, describes a memory that is not his own. Titus alone in the void, speaking to entities older than chaos, promising something he no longer recalls. The psychers debate whether these are visions of the past, or prophecies of futures that should never exist. And when they turn to stare at the captain, standing silent beneath the watchful eyes of statues, they feel something impossible. He is afraid. That, more than anything, terrifies them. Gilliman closes himself within his sanctum, studying the fracture in his effigy. He touches the split stone and feels it pulse faintly, as though connected to something alive, something waking. He recalls ancient memories of the Emperor, of quiet conversations in shadowed halls, of warnings never fully explained. A realization dawns upon him like a thunderbolt. The Emperor did not design Titus. The Emperor discovered him. Guilliman staggers, the truth too heavy even for a demigod. He feels the Imperium's fragile scaffolding tremble as though prepared to collapse under the weight of that revelation. And in that moment, he understands. Titus is not a deviation. He is a forgotten beginning. Meanwhile, in the deepest vault, the shard continues its awakening. It rotates slowly, humming a melody older than mortal thought. Titus approaches it, drawn as though by instinct carved into his bones. He reaches toward the relic. Reality flickers. The vault walls ripple. Time buckles inward. And from the shard erupts a storm of memories not his own, yet intimately familiar. He sees stars born from broken gods. He sees civilizations rise and crumble before humanity learned fire. He sees beings of pure thought forging weapons from the echoes of dying universes. And in the heart of that cosmic tapestry, he sees himself, or someone who wears his face, crafting the shard with hands shaped from starlight. The vision collapses. Titus falls to one knee, trembling, breath ragged. The truth claws at him, screaming to be understood. He feels the burden of eternity press against his mortal frame. He tries to deny it, to cling to the identity carved by war and duty, but denial melts in the face of memory. Above him, the shard pulses once more, and Titus's eyes glow with ancient light. A transformation begins, not corruption, not mutation, but awakening. He whispers a word his lips should not know. A word that predates mankind, predates the Imperium, predates even the warp, and the galaxy feels it. A truth long buried begins to rise. A storm long denied begins to gather. And on the precipice of fate, everything trembles, waiting for the first strike. Titus rises from the fracture of reality, with light still bleeding from his eyes, the vault groaning around him as though the very stone strains to contain the truth he has become. The shard hovers above his palm, trembling with the weight of eons, singing in a voice that is not sound but memory. Guilliman enters the chamber through a storm of shattering glyphs, his armored tread steady though the universe trembles at his approach. For a heartbeat, Primarch and Captain stare at one another, not as master and servant, but as two beings standing on the edge of a truth too vast for language. Guilliman speaks the captain's name, but the syllable fractures, warping under the relic's resonance. And in that stillness, Titus realizes the final cruelty. Destiny was not handed to him, it was carved into him. He steps forward, and the galaxy feels the shift. The walls rupture as demonic entities spill through the cracks in time the shard has torn open, their forms made of screaming light and rotted divinity. They swarm toward Titus, sensing in him a being they were once bound to obey, perhaps even fear. Their voices batter the minds of all present in jagged, broken hymns. In an instant, the vault becomes a cathedral of war. Space Marines form a cordon around their captain, firing disciplined volleys that carve molten arcs through the encroaching horde. Guilliman charges forward, his blade cleaving through warped flesh, each strike as precise as scripture. Yet the demons do not break, they kneel. They offer not obedience, but recognition. And Titus feels an ancient name ache at the back of his mind, a name spoken before the birth of chaos itself. He rejects it, screaming as though tearing out a piece of his own soul. The shard responds. A blast of force shreds the battlefield, hurling demons like dust. The Ultramarines stagger, their autosenses brick with static. Titus stands at the eye of the storm, the relic orbiting him like a blazing halo. Memories assault him, not visions, but lived centuries. He sees himself forging treaties with starborn entities whose forms defy geometry, sees wars fought in dimensions humanity has no words for, sees himself choosing extinction over dominion. The truth crashes through him. He was once a being tasked with guiding young civilizations, but when humanity rose, radiant and beautiful, he chose to become one of them. He severed himself from eternity, bound his essence into mortal flesh, and forgot. Until now. Titus collapses to his knees, hands trembling as the relic pulses like a dying star. Guilliman watches, horror and awe warring within his cerulean gaze. The demons, sensing their moment, surge again. This time, Titus does not move to defend himself. Instead, he lifts his gaze to Guilliman. His voice is ragged, mortal again, stripped of cosmic resonance. He tells the Primarch that the shard is not a weapon. It is a promise, one he made long before the Imperium's birth. A promise to stand against something vast and devouring that even chaos fears. A shadow stirring beyond the universe. A hunger that devoured the stars of his first home. The demons howl in agreement, their malice drowned beneath ancient terror. Guilliman steps forward, sword poised, as if ready to strike down either Titus or the truth itself. Titus presses the shard into his chest. It burns through ceramite, flesh, and spirit, and he screams, not from pain, but from the overwhelming clarity of 1,000 forgotten lifetimes rekindling at once. Light erupts. The demons turn to ash. The vault explodes outward in a sphere of blinding radiance, a miniature supernova that consumes everything within reach. Marines are hurled into walls. Statues of Guilliman crack and collapse. The entire fortress trembles as if struck by an orbital lance. When the light dims, Titus stands transformed, not ascended, not divine, but whole. His armor is gone, replaced by luminous scars that crawl like constellations across his skin. His eyes burn like twin dying stars. He looks at Guilliman and calls him brother, not in blood, but in burden. The Primarch's composure cracks. For the first time in 10,000 years, he whispers a plea, "Do not leave us." But Titus shakes his head. The promise he made cannot be broken again. To stay would doom them all. The fortress alarms shriek as reality fractures above Ultramar. A wound opens in the sky, not warp, not void, but something older, something hungry. Titus rises into the air, drawn toward the rift like a moth toward the flame of its own demise. Guilliman reaches out, but cannot touch him. The Ultramarines can only watch as their captain ascends toward a threat none of them can comprehend. A choir of distant, alien wails reverberates through the atmosphere, shaking mountains and oceans. Titus turns once, gaze heavy with sorrow, pride, and unspoken apology. He cannot take his memories with him. He cannot take his humanity. But he can take the shard, the last weapon against the coming dark. With a final whisper, he tells Guilliman to remember not him, but the cost of hope. He enters the rift. Silence falls. The wound in the sky seals like a scar. The fortress stands in ruins. The demons are gone. The relic is gone. And Titus, the man, the myth, the forgotten eternal, is gone. Guilliman stands among shattered stone, surrounded by kneeling warriors, each bowed beneath the weight of a grief too vast for words. In that quiet devastation, the Primarch realizes that the Imperium has lost not just a hero, but a piece of its future. He orders no funeral rites, no statues, no hymns. Some sacrifices must remain unspoken, but he keeps the cracked piece of the broken effigy, the one that split when Titus touched it, and places it upon his desk as a reminder that even gods can forget what they once were. A decade passes. Whispers circulate across a dozen worlds, strange lights in deep space, voices in dreams. Demons retreating from shadows that do not belong to the warp. Something has changed. Something eternal has shifted. And though none speak his name, every soul in Ultramar feels the same truth lingering like a distant heartbeat. Titus is still out there, holding back something that remembers him far too well. From the moment Titus vanished into the wound in the heavens, Ultramar carried a silence that did not belong to mortals. It lingered in the cloisters of shattered fortresses, in the hollowed basilicas where candles guttered beneath drafts that smelled faintly of ozone and loss. Remembrancers wrote of him in ink the color of midnight, as though afraid the light might resent their words. Guilliman stood often upon the same battlement where Titus once saluted him, watching the stars for any sign, a distortion, a shimmer, a tremor of remembered radiance. None came. Yet still the Primarch held vigil, whispering prayers to an emperor who had not spoken in 10,000 years, asking whether sacrifice could truly shape fate or merely delay its teeth. And in the cold hours before dawn, he wondered whether destiny had taken Titus, or whether the captain had chosen, once more, to walk into the dark alone. Whispers spread across the neighboring systems, subtle as drifting spores. Pilgrims claimed to see a lone figure striding across the hulls of derelict void ships, his silhouette burning faintly in the abyss. Astropaths woke screaming with visions of a warrior wrapped in stellar fire, battling shapes so vast they could not fit within human imagination. The people of Macragge placed candles on their windowsills, each flame a memory of the captain who had once walked among them with mortal humility and impossible purpose. Children asked priests where heroes went when they died. The priests, uncertain, spoke of the Emperor's light, but their voices trembled with the fear that some souls must wander far beyond the reach of any god. And so the myth grew, not of ascension, but of endurance, of a warrior who refused oblivion out of love for a species that had long forgotten how to hope. Years turned, grinding like titanic gears through the fabric of time. Wars raged, crusades faltered, and empires bled into the dust. Yet every so often, in the aftermath of a battlefield where no survivor remained, a symbol was found etched into the scorched earth, a stylized U, flanked by 2 streaks of falling flame. Librarians analyzed the markings, concluding they had been carved with a heat beyond plasma, or melta. Guilliman examined one in person, tracing its edges with a gaunted hand. He said nothing to his captains, but they saw the tremor in his stance, the tremor of a Primarch who recognized a secret carved in silence. The markings were a message, a farewell, or perhaps a warning. For the lines were always scorched into the ground, facing the same distant quadrant of the galaxy, where no Imperial map dared draw roots, where the stars were thinning as if being consumed. In the deep vaults of the Librarius, adepts uncovered a strange phenomenon. Every chronicle that mentioned Titus, every parchment, every data codex, every spoken oath containing his name began to degrade. Ink faded, vox recordings warped, memory crystals cracked. It was as though the universe itself were attempting to erase him, to cauterize the wound he'd left behind. Guilliman forbade their destruction, but even he could not halt the slow unraveling. Remembrancers wept as their writings dissolved into dust. And in this dissolution, a terrible understanding grew, that Titus had become something entwined with forces beyond mortal comprehension, forces that sought secrecy rather than worship. The Imperium, desperate for heroes, clung to his legend even as it crumbled in their hands. And some whispered that the captain's greatest sacrifice was not his life, but his remembrance. Across the eastern fringe, void-born shepherds observed whole constellations dimming in patterns resembling the wings of a vast predatory shape. No warp signatures accompanied it. No transmissions, only the quiet dying of light. Explorators fled before they could confirm their findings, but stories filtered back. Ruined worlds stripped not by tyrannid swarms nor chaos storms, but by something older, patient, and cold. One ship brought a final message scratched onto a bulkhead by a single trembling hand. He fights it still. The Imperium tried to dismiss it as delirium, yet the word spread like wildfire in the hearts of those who remembered Titus' last stand. Even Guilliman, upon reading the message, closed his eyes as though struck by a memory too heavy to bear. But when asked what he saw, he only said, "A man who refuses to fall, even when the cosmos demands his surrender." In the shrine cities of Connor, a basilica long dedicated to the valor of Ultramar began to crack from within. Choirs reported hearing footsteps echoing between the pillars when no one walked there. Ancient banners fluttered without wind, their cerulean cloth rippling as though brushed by an unseen gauntlet. The high priest, fearing blasphemy, sealed the basilica. Yet on the eve of its sealing, he discovered a single helm placed upon the central altar, a helm shaped like an Ultramarine's, but darkened by cosmic radiation and etched with constellations unknown to Imperial charts. Its eye lenses glowed faintly, beating like a dying heart. The priest fell to his knees, whispering prayers he knew no one would hear. Was it a sign of continued struggle? Or a relic of a final stand already lost? The helm vanished by dawn, leaving only a scorch mark in the shape of a starburst. The galaxy marched on. Wars layered atop wars like sedimentary graves. Yet in quiet corners, a widow's shrine, a child's sketch, a captain's oath, the memory of Titus lingered like a stubborn ember. Guilliman himself began to age beneath the weight of endless duty, though his gene-forged body resisted the decay. At times, the Primarch would look into the void as though waiting for a friend to return through the gates of eternity. His advisors spoke of strategy, diplomacy, logistics, but Guilliman listened only partly. In his silences, he carried a question that gnawed at even his vast intellect. If one mortal-born soul could refuse oblivion, what then is the true measure of humanity? And though he never voiced it, another question lay beneath. What must it cost him to keep fighting, alone, in the dark between dying stars? A century after Titus' disappearance, a single transmission pierced the void. It was brief, distorted beyond recognition, a shriek of starlight collapsing through forbidden channels. Tech priests nearly dismissed it as noise, but a data savant isolated a fragment, a voice, faint, breaking, speaking a single word, remember, and then silence. The message repeated only once, then vanished from all records, as though devoured by the void. Guilliman ordered every scrap of analysis preserved, yet the machines refused to store it. They claimed no such message existed. But those who heard it knew the truth. It had been Titus, or what was left of him, reaching back across an abyss no mortal could traverse. Some claimed it was a farewell. Others believed it was a plea. But all agreed on one thing: the word carried sorrow vast enough to eclipse suns. Time thickened. Empires stumbled. The galaxy became an endless procession of funerals. And in the shadows of dead stars, shapes moved with hungry patience. The threat Titus had pursued, the silent devourer beyond chaos, crept closer, undeterred by the efforts of one warrior, even one who had once been more than mortal. Yet the slowing of its advance was visible to those who dared to chart the void. Something held it at bay. Something scarred the creature of uncreation deeply enough that it no longer rushed toward the galaxy with predatory certainty. And those who studied these patterns began to whisper theories too dangerous to speak aloud, that Titus was no longer merely resisting the darkness, but wounding it. That his struggle echoed across light years, carving defiance into the fabric of the void itself. Yet every victory carries a price. On the 1000th year since Titus disappeared, a tear opened in the sky above a forgotten frontier moon. It was not warp, not void, but something colder, something bruised. Through it drifted a single feather-shaped fragment of luminous ash. It fell upon the moon's barren surface, burning a symbol into the dust. The stylized U of Ultramar cracked down the center. Scholars interpreted it as omen. Soldiers saw it as warning. Guilliman, upon receiving the image, dismissed his counsel and stood alone for hours, staring at the sigil. When he spoke again, his voice held a tremor not of fear, but grief. "He is breaking," the Primarch murmured. "Even the eternal can wither." And though no one dared say it aloud, they all felt the same dread bloom, that even a hero forged against oblivion cannot stand forever. Still, humanity endured, as it always had, stubborn, fragile, beautiful in its defiance. Cathedrals rebuilt. Cities rose from ruins. Children were born under skies that still held stars. And in quiet chapels, candles were lit for a warrior who had carried their hope into a battlefield beyond imagining. Some priests taught that Titus had become guardian spirit, a martyr wandering the void. Others insisted he had been reclaimed by the Emperor himself. But the remembrancers, those who knew the truth buried in fading chronicles, spoke softly of a man who chose the hardest path, to fight not for glory, but so others might awaken each dawn unaware of how close the universe came to ending. And in their quiet voices there lingered sorrow, for they knew no chronicle would ever fully capture the weight of that choice. One final record remained, written by an aged remembrancer in a chamber lit by a single failing lumen. His hands trembled as he traced the closing lines of a chronicle spanning lifetimes. He wrote of the sound of distant storms beyond the stars, of the sense that somewhere, someone still pushed back against the dark. He asked questions no doctrine could answer. What becomes of a soul that gives everything? Does it fade, transform? Or does it become the silence that protects us? And as he set down his quill, he noted a strange glow in the sky outside, a streak of blue fire vanishing into the void, too swift to confirm, too haunting to ignore. He smiled through tears and whispered, "May you finally rest, Captain." And in the silence that followed, the universe seemed to exhale. These chronicles fade now, carried like dust through a cathedral of dying stars. They do not ask for belief, only remembrance, only witness. If Titus' story has moved you, if his sacrifice has stirred your spirit, then stand with the chronicle a little longer. Like, share, and subscribe so his legacy may echo across more distant souls. And speak in the comments so the stars may know you heard his name.